Hi, this is Matt Baker. Today I'm going to show you the family tree of Chinese emperors. I'll mostly be focusing on the medieval and modern dynasties, but before we get to them, I am going to start with the legendary Yellow Emperor and briefly summarize the dynasties of kings and emperors who ruled China during ancient times. As you can see, for most of the video, I'll be using our brand new East Asian Royal Family Trees chart, which is available as a poster from our website usefulcharts.com. In addition to China, it also covers Japan, which I've already done a video on, as well as Korea and Mongolia, which I'll be doing videos on in the future. We also sell two charts covering the many European royal family trees, a timeline of world history, as well as many other titles. So again, if you're interested in learning more about any of these posters, just head over to usefulcharts.com or simply click the link in the description or pinned comment. Okay, the first thing you need to know about China is that unlike Japan, it has been ruled by many different dynasties instead of just one. In fact, one of the most important concepts in Chinese history is the idea of the mandate of heaven, which basically states that it's normal for one dynasty to overthrow another, because whenever that happens, it's because the old dynasty had become corrupt, and therefore heaven decided that a new dynasty was needed in order to restore peace and stability. According to legend, Chinese history begins with the three sovereigns, Fuxi and Nua, who created humans, and Shennong, who invented farming. They are then followed by five legendary emperors, the first of which, called the Yellow Emperor, is considered to be the founder of China. However, the first dynasty is considered to be the Xia dynasty, which was founded by Yu the Great, who, according to legend, was the first to control the floods that occur along the Yellow River. But there is no firm evidence for the Xia dynasty's existence, and therefore it too is considered to be mostly legendary, meaning that Chinese history really begins around 1600 BCE with the Shang dynasty, the first set of monarchs for which we have verifiable records. But take note, the Shang rulers were not emperors, they were kings. During their tenure, bronze working became common in China, and the earliest form of Chinese writing developed, using the Chinese characters that evolved into the ones still used today. But then in 1046, the Shang dynasty was overthrown by the Zhou dynasty, which can be divided into the initial Western Zhou and the later Eastern Zhou. You see, in 771 BCE, their capital was overthrown, forcing them to set up a new capital in the east, where they continued to reign, but mostly as just figureheads, with feudal lords holding most of the real power. This coincided with what's called the Spring and Autumn period, which is when the groundwork for Chinese philosophy was laid through figures such as Lao Tzu and Confucius. We then get the Warring States period, which is when the political situation got really chaotic, and the Zhou dynasty formally came to an end. Which brings us to the actual first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, who managed to conquer and thus unite all of the Chinese states, completing the process in 221 BCE. At this point, he upgraded his title of Wang, meaning king, to Huangdi, meaning supreme ruler or emperor. In addition to being the first emperor, he is also remembered for starting the construction of the Great Wall of China and for being buried with an army of 8,000 terracotta soldiers. But for all of his accomplishments, his dynasty did not last long, although the name of the dynasty did, because it's from the word Qin that we get the word China. So within a decade of the first emperor's death, a new dynasty took over, the Han dynasty, founded by Emperor Gaozu. It would go on to last for about 400 years and is considered to be China's first golden age. Its most famous ruler is Emperor Wu, who established the Silk Road connecting China to India, the Middle East, and Europe for the first time ever. His descendants ruled until the short-lived Qin dynasty, when a usurper briefly took over, only to be followed by a restored Han dynasty, sometimes called the Eastern Han dynasty, which lasted until 220 CE. At this point, we get the Three Kingdoms period, a brief reunification under the Jin dynasty, and then a period known as the Northern and Southern dynasties. Which brings us to the top of the East Asian royal family trees poster, which I'll be using for the rest of the video. After the Northern and Southern dynasties, China was once again reunited by Emperor Wen of the Sui dynasty. But as you can see, the Sui dynasty was short-lived, being quickly replaced by the Tang dynasty, led by Emperor Gaozu. Now, if you remember, the first emperor of the earlier Han dynasty was also named Gaozu. This is not a coincidence, but rather the result of how the Chinese emperors are named. You see, each emperor actually has many different names, such as their birth name, era name, and temple name, among several others. During their lifetimes, each emperor would simply have been referred to as Huangdi, but after death, each one was given a special temple name to be used for ceremonial purposes. In the case of both Gaozu of Han and Gaozu of Tang, they were both given the name Gaozu because it literally means highest ancestor. So take note that until we reach the Ming dynasty, all emperors will be listed using their temple names. Anyhow, Gaozu was followed by Taizong, who was given that name because it means great ancestor. What made Taizong so great was that he was open to following the advice of his advisors, which led China to reach new levels of wealth and stability, ushering in a second golden age. In fact, during his reign, China's capital city, Chang'an, became the largest and most prosperous city in the entire world, and thus most historians today consider Taizong to have been the greatest Chinese emperor of all time. He was followed by his son Gaozong, who ended up falling in love with one of his father's lower-ranking concubines, named Wu Ziqian, eventually making her his official empress. He, however, had bad health, and eventually Wu Ziqian took over as regent. After Gaozong died, Wu Ziqian continued to serve as regent during the first reigns of both Zhang and Ruizong. But then in 690, Wu Ziqian made herself emperor, becoming the first and only female emperor in Chinese history. Thus, for 15 years, the Tang dynasty was replaced with the Wu-Zhou dynasty. But eventually, Wu Ziqian was deposed, with both Zhang and Ruizong once again serving as emperors, as well as Zhang's son, Shang, for just 17 days. After all this back and forthing, the throne finally settled on Ruizong's son, Xuanzang, who had a nice long reign of 44 years, which is when the Tang dynasty reached its peak. In fact, he would have reigned even longer had it not been for the An Lushan rebellion, which started when a general named An Lushan tried to overthrow the Tang dynasty. During the initial stages of the rebellion, An Lushan managed to capture the capital city of Chang'an, forcing Emperor Xuanzang to flee. At this point, Xuanzang's son, Suzong, declared himself to be emperor. Suzong managed to retake the capital, but the rebellion wasn't fully quashed until the first year of his son Daizong's reign. By the end, at least 13 million lives were lost, making it the deadliest uninterrupted war in human history relative to the global population at the time. As you can imagine, this put an end to the Tang dynasty's golden age, and from here onwards, while the dynasty did continue, it was definitely in decline. The final blow came due to another rebellion, the Huangchao Rebellion, which occurred during the reign of Shizong. This left China in complete disarray, resulting in the ultimate collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907. What followed was the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, during which time China fractured into a bunch of small states. But then, as we've seen before, reunification was once again achieved, this time by the Song dynasty, initially led by Taizu and then by Taizu's brother Taizong. The line continued through Taizong, with his grandson Renzong becoming the longest reigning Song emperor at 41 years. Now, the most important thing to note about the Song dynasty period is its technological achievements, 4 in particular, all of which were major improvements on the 4 great inventions of ancient China. The first was paper currency. While paper itself was invented during the Han period, and paper notes were sometimes used during the Tang period, it wasn't until the Song era that the government started issuing official paper currency. The second achievement was a better compass. Again, the original compass was invented during the Han period, but those were quite heavy and therefore not really used for navigation. However, during the Song era, portable compasses were invented, meaning that you could take one on a boat or any long journey. Third was gunpowder. Gunpowder was first formulated during the Tang period, but it wasn't until the Song era that it was used for military purposes. Finally, there was movable type printing. While whole-page woodblock printing had been used previously, during the Song era, ceramic tiles for each letter were created, so that you could move them around and reuse them to print whatever text you wanted. Now, one of the most interesting emperors of the Song dynasty is Huizong. He was a man of the arts, a truly great painter, poet, and calligrapher. But tragically, this meant that he didn't pay enough attention to politics. And what happened was that a people group to the north, known as the Jurchens, were allowed to become really powerful. Led by Tezu of Jin, they founded the state of Great Jin, which eventually attacked Song China. Realizing his mistake, Huizong abdicated, passing the throne to his reluctant son, Qinzong. But within a month, the Great Jin was able to depose Qinzong and conquer all of northern China. However, Qinzong's brother, Gaozong, was able to flee south and set up a new capital there. Thus, the Song dynasty was able to continue, but only in the southern half of the empire. This is why from this point forward, they are labeled as the Southern Song. Gaozong's only biological son, Jiaofu, died at age 2, and thus, after Gaozong's death, the line passed to the descendants of the Song dynasty's founder, Tezu. First this branch, and then this branch. Now, during the Southern Song period, an even greater power to the north arose. In fact, one of the greatest that the world has ever seen, the Mongols, led by Genghis Khan. While he himself wasn't able to conquer China during his lifetime, the Jin dynasty ended up following to his son, Ogedei, and the Southern Song to his grandson, Kublai Khan. It was during this time period that Marco Polo famously visited China. In 1279, Kublai Khan became the undisputed Emperor of China, and from here onwards, he and his descendants are known as the Yuan dynasty of China. After death, Kublai Khan received the temple name Shurzu, with the next emperor being his grandson, Chengzong. But then, after Chengzong, things bounced back and forth between various branches of the tree, before finally settling on Huizong, who had a nice long reign of 35 years. However, in 1368, after 89 years of Mongol rule, China won back its independence with the rise of the Ming dynasty, initially led by the Hongwu emperor. At this point, the Yuan dynasty did continue, but only to the north of China, which is why we get a label change here to Northern Yuan. Now, before I continue, I want to point out that Useful Charts currently has a campaign over on Kickstarter, where we have launched our expanded Tree of Life project. Of the many educational posters that we sell at Useful Charts, one of the most popular has always been our Evolutionary Tree of Life chart, which we did a major update of in 2024. Ever since then, I've been wanting to go into certain parts of that tree in greater detail, which is what this project is all about. Basically, the goal is to create a series of 4 posters, each of which will expand on a different part of the Tree of Life. The first one, Plants and Fungi, is already finished, but in order to complete the other 3, we need your help. The exact breakdown is yet to be determined, but they are likely to be insects and other invertebrates, fish, amphibians, and reptiles, and finally, birds and mammals. Each chart will be printed on thick quality paper at an amazingly high resolution. So if you want to be among the first to receive one of these titles, I encourage you to pre-order now. You can choose to receive any 1 chart out of the 4, any 2 charts out of the 4, or the full set. You can also simply show your support by pledging $1, which helps drive the Kickstarter algorithm. We've got some fun stretch goals planned, and we'll have everything printed and mailed out by the end of November. So whether you're buying for yourself or giving them as holiday gifts, I encourage you to back the project right now. Okay, let's now take a look at the Ming dynasty. First off, as I mentioned earlier, from here onwards, era names will be used for emperors instead of temple names. as this is the convention used by most historians. Second, take note that it was during the Ming period that Beijing, as we know it today, started to be built, on top of what had previously been the Yuan capital. This included famous structures such as the Forbidden City, Tiananmen Gate, and Temple of Heaven, all of which were commissioned by the Yongle Emperor, who is considered to have been the greatest emperor of the Ming dynasty. You see, it was him who named Beijing Beijing, which literally means just northern capital. The Yongle Emperor is also the one who commissioned the great explorer Zheng He, whose famous treasure fleet traveled all over Southeast Asia, India, and the Middle East, even going as far as what is today Kenya in East Africa. The other thing that comes to mind when people think about the Ming dynasty is China. Not the country itself, but the type of ceramic known as porcelain or fine china, which was obviously named after the country. You see, during the reign of the Xuande Emperor, a certain type of blue and white porcelain from a Chinese city called Jingdezhen became really popular, and it remains popular to this day all over the world. Other Ming rulers of note include the Hongzhi Emperor, who was the only Chinese emperor to have just one wife, and the Wanli Emperor, who set the stage for the dynasty's decline, when, partway through his reign, he refused to perform any of his duties. His final few years as emperor coincided with the rise of the later Jin dynasty in the north. They were led by Norhachi, who managed to reunite the Jurchen tribes with the aim of conquering China like the earlier Jin dynasty had done. Norhachi was followed by his son Hong Taiji, who conquered Inner Mongolia, putting an end to the northern Yuan dynasty. Around the same time, he changed the name of the Jurchen people to the Manchu people, which is where the word Manchuria comes from. He also changed the name of the Jin dynasty to the Qing dynasty, because the Chinese letter for Qing contains the water radical, whereas the letter for Ming contains the fire radical. Water puts out fire, so in other words, he was saying the Qing are about to extinguish the Ming. And he was right, because just after he died, his half-brother Dorgan, serving as regent for Hong Taiji's son, Xuanje, did exactly that, capturing Beijing in 1644. Now, when Beijing fell, a cousin of the last Ming emperor fled south, and from there declared himself to be the true emperor. He was followed in quick succession by 3 other members of the Ming dynasty. Together, they are known as the Southern Ming dynasty. In 1662, though, the Qing conquered the southern Ming as well, forcing the final Ming loyalists to flee to Taiwan, where they took over the island from the Dutch and set up the kingdom of Dongning. However, that kingdom only lasted about 20 years, and eventually they surrendered to the Qing as well in 1681. By this point, the Kangxi Emperor was on the throne. He ended up being the longest reigning Chinese emperor of all time at 61 years. And during his reign, China once again became stable and prosperous. He was followed by his son, and then by his grandson, the Qianlong Emperor, who also had a really long reign. In fact, he would have beat the Kangxi Emperor, but opted to retire after 60 years out of respect for his grandfather. During his reign, China reached its greatest extent, as you can see from this map here. During the 19th century, however, the Qing Empire started to decline, especially after losing the 2 Opium Wars against the United Kingdom, which led to the creation of Hong Kong as a British colony. At the same time as the Second Opium War, China was also in the middle of an internal conflict known as the Taiping Rebellion. It started when this man, Hong Xiuquan, claimed to be the younger brother of, wait for it, Jesus. Hong Xiuquan managed to set up the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, centered at Nanjing, which lasted for about 14 years. In the end, the Qing armies were able to quash the rebellion, but at a great cost to human life. Estimates put the death count at around 20 to 30 million, which is more than that of World War I. Now, during this tumultuous period, the Xianfeng Emperor died from poor health at age 30, leading his 5-year-old son to become the Tangzhi Emperor. Soon thereafter, his mother, Empress Cixi, staged a coup, placing herself in the position of regent. So it was actually she who was in charge at the end of the Taiping Rebellion. She ended up ruling much longer than expected, though, because just as the Tongzhi Emperor reached adulthood, he died from smallpox, at which point Cixi made her 3-year-old nephew the Guangxu Emperor so that she could continue to be regent. Even when the Guangxu Emperor reached adulthood, she continued to be the power behind the throne, and therefore ended up serving as the de facto ruler of China for a total of 47 years. Her last political move, while on her deathbed, was to arrange the assassination of the Guangxu Emperor by way of arsenic poisoning. Basically, she didn't want him reversing any of her policies after her death. As it turned out, she actually died just 1 day after her nephew. With both main members of the imperial family now dead, her allies followed her wishes and made her 2-year-old great-nephew, Puyi, emperor, so that they could continue to be in control. But by this point, Imperial China had been further weakened by wars against France, Japan, and then 8 nations all at once during the Boxer Rebellion. In 1911, a revolution broke out, and by February the next year, Puyi was forced to abdicate, bringing an end to the 4,000-year monarchy of China. At first, China became the Republic of China, but then in 1949, as I'm sure you know, it became the communist-led People's Republic of China, which is what it is today. Now, before I go, I do want to address the question, who would be emperor of China today? If for some reason China wanted to restore its monarchy, or if the Qing dynasty had never been deposed. Well, first off, I want to point out that Puyi did actually reign as emperor again, this time as an adult, but also as a puppet of Japan, during the years that they controlled Manchuria, which they called Manchukuo. After World War II, he was held as a prisoner, first in the Soviet Union and then later in communist China, before finally being released in 1959 to live out his final 8 years as a regular citizen, although obviously he remained under close watch. Puyi did marry 5 times, but never had any children. So after his death, his claim to the imperial throne passed first to his full brother Pu Jie, who had only daughters, and then to his half-brother Pu Ren, better known as Jin Youzhi. Surprisingly, he lived all the way to 2015, at which point the claim passed to his son Jin Yuzhang. So it is this man here who would be emperor of China today. Okay, so that was a look at the family tree of Chinese emperors. Once again, if you want to get a copy of this chart as a poster, just head over to usefulcharts.com or simply click the link in the description or pinned comment. And don't forget to check out our Kickstarter and pledge for a reward if you're able. Thanks for watching.